ain't see me, you Stevie. Wondering how I reach more evolutions than Eevee and make it look easy.
What is up, Earth's mightiest subscribers? It's Blerd without fear. Welcome back to the channel. All right, today's video, we're gonna be talking about Ms. Marvel Mutant Menace #1. Written by Iman Vellani and Sabir Pirzada, with art by Scott Godlewski and color by Eric Arciniega. For those who have not been keeping up, Ms. Marvel recently became a mutant at this past year's Hellfire Gala, following her death in the Amazing Spider-Man #26. She was resurrected on Krakoa at the beginning of that Hellfire Gala one-shot, and she has been a mutant ever since. It was revealed that she was always a mutant, but when she became an Inhuman, when she underwent the process of Terrigenesis, the Terrigenesis effectively turned off her X gene. For those who are unfamiliar, this was technically done because originally Kamala Khan was intended to be a mutant, but because Kamala Khan debuted in 2013, roughly in and around the same time that Marvel Comics was largely steering away from X-Men content. Not to say they weren't making X-Men content, but they were going well and out of their way to not provide new X-Men related content because they didn't want to fuel the intellectual property rights of Fox at the time. Basically, any character that was created that was a new X-Men character, or at the time, even a Fantastic Four character, just was more fuel for them to just crank out bad movies and hold on to the intellectual property rights of both Fantastic Four and X-Men until they just suddenly decided to no longer make movies about them. That's kind of how intellectual property rights work in a lot of cases. If you don't use it, you lose it, and they didn't want to. So Marvel just decided to make their jobs harder for them, but that's not really what we're here to talk about. The point is that Ms. Marvel would have been a mutant if not for the weirdness of Fox, which is no longer really a thing anymore, at least not the way it was. But that is how we ultimately get to this point, Ms. Marvel being put to what she was initially meant to be. And while we've already had Ms. Marvel the New Mutant as a series, also by roughly the exact same creative team if I'm not mistaken, what's going on here is that Ms. Marvel's Inhuman powers, now that she's become a mutant, are starting to go haywire. Now, what exactly is this related to? Is this related to what Dr. Nikita Gaia had done to her in the previous series of Ms. Marvel the New Mutant? It's difficult to say at this point, but there is definitely some connection in some way, shape, form, or fashion, but I don't think it's gonna go the way that a lot of people likely think. While yes, Dr. Nikita Gaia, who served as kind of a shadow villain for the previous series, she had gotten her hands onto Ms. Marvel's DNA, and we saw at the very end of that first series that she got the hell out of Dodge, away from Orchis, and was, for whatever reason, analyzing Ms. Marvel's DNA. And we now see the fruit of her analyzing Ms. Marvel's DNA, and it's that she has now detected Ms. Marvel's X gene, and I won't even say so much detected it, but she was performing DNA analysis on her. And while we don't know exactly what she was doing with it, initially my thought was maybe she's just trying to take her powers away, because once again, Ms. Marvel's powers are seemingly turning off and on at very inconvenient times. But I think what's actually happening here is that Dr. Nikita Gaia, she knows exactly what Ms. Marvel's X gene powers are, and while Kamala does not have access to those because, once again, her X gene is dormant and is not awoken even after she was resurrected on Krakoa, they didn't turn her X gene back on. They wanted her to have the opportunity to make that choice for herself. But I think what's going on here is that Dr. Nikita Gaia has likely discovered what I feel a lot of us have already done. It's kind of like the elephant in the room. People have been asking, what is Ms. Marvel's mutant power? And I keep saying it over and over again. I think it's safe to say it's very much representative of the powers we see her using in the MCU. While the powers she uses in the MCU allow her to create hard-like constructs that kind of in a half-ass way allow her to replicate her powers from the comics, it seems like that's the direction they're gonna go, is it adding that hard-like construct ability to her power set. But as far as what Dr. Nikita Gaia plans to use this information for, after we see her visit a tailor who creates for her the classic Kamala Khan costume, it seems like one of two things is gonna happen here. Either she is gonna become the quotey fingers old Ms. Marvel, or she's going to clone an old Ms. Marvel, though I think the former is far more likely than the latter. Whether or not she pulls that off is another story altogether. It can honestly go either way, but at the end of the day, it seems this is all pointing towards a mirror match. Ms. Marvel versus Ms. Marvel classic. This all makes sense because the story is already kind of hinting at it, with people being divided on Ms. Marvel, with some thinking she's betrayed them, that she's turned her back on humankind in Jersey City, which is just a weird thing to say in and of itself. She had superpowers before and people loved her, but now suddenly because she's a mutant, they think, oh, she's evil now. And that's all because of the smear campaign Orchis has been perpetrating against mutants since the House of X era even began. And even if you take that out of consideration, mutant kind didn't really do a good job of ingratiating themselves to humanity in any way, shape, form, or fashion during the House of X era either. You know, I mean, yeah, sure, Krakoan medicines and life-extending drugs and, you know, mental health cure-alls and, you know, physical ailment cure-alls are great, but they did kind of lord that shit over them, and we also can't forget Magneto telling humanity they had new gods now, a line that has come up repeatedly since he said it, especially during the Fall of X portion of the House of X era. But yeah, everyone is just kind of divided on it. There's a lot of people who even believe that Ms. Marvel was better as the old Ms. Marvel, and not only that, but Orchis isn't making it any better in regards to the people close to her. Orchis has stooped to interrogating Ms. Marvel's friends, showing up at her mosque, harassing the people close to her, all in an effort to detain her. But whatever it is going on, at the end of the day, with Ms. Marvel's power instabilities going on right now, she is not in a position to have to deal with Orchis as well as Horde Culture, which, for those of you who are unfamiliar, Horde Culture is a group of octogenarian women who were introduced early on in Jonathan Hickman's X-Men. And as a matter of fact, many of these women, and I would actually dare say almost all of them, are inspired by his own grandmothers. But that is neither here nor there. The point is that while Horde Culture has largely taken a back seat in the X-Men mythos as of late, they are back now with a vengeance, and it's not even to say that they weren't really doing anything or that they've been resting on their hands. We've actually seen how they've been working with Orchis in the background and just not really making a big deal about it. We saw them operating in tandem with Orchis during Jonathan Hickman's Inferno. We also saw them appear during Al Ewing's Empire event, working in and alongside the X-Men. We even saw a former member of Horde Culture, Harriet Brooms, aka the Harrower, who had been making waves in the Curse of Man-Thing story arc, as well as some of the more recent issues of Deadpool. Though she has been off kind of doing her own thing. She's not necessarily tied to Horde Culture anymore, but right now, Horde Culture, they're out here hunting down mutants, one specifically known as the Planter, or at least that's his working superhero title right now, but a guy who can literally absorb the properties of any plant he touches and utilize that plant's capabilities. And while Horde Culture is largely thought of as kind of a joke villain group, or I say joke just in terms of the fact that they're silly, it's not to say that they're not threatening, and Ms. Marvel is learning that firsthand. She's never really had any interactions with Horde Culture, but yet here she is dealing with them and her powers turning off and on at the worst possible moments when she's trying to deal with them. And I think what's going on here is not so much that Dr. Nikita Gaia has done anything to her. I think what's actually going on here is that her X gene is trying to turn on. And as I said earlier, the mutant X gene and the inhuman gene, they are highly incompatible with one another. And Ms. Marvel is unique in that she is not only a mutant, but she is also an inhuman, and her X gene had to be turned off in order for Terrigenesis to have taken place. That is why when she underwent Terrigenesis, her X gene was no longer active and she was suddenly an inhuman. But in death, she's been brought back and she's been revealed to have that dormant X gene still. And it has been constantly hinted at that at some point it will probably come back, and probably when she least expects it. But with that being stated, it seems like the time is now, and as a result of her X gene starting to turn back on, it seems like maybe that's why her inhuman powers are turning off. All that said, this comic is great. It is giving a lot of nods towards past Ms. Marvel events, giving throwbacks to things like the Inventor, even some throwbacks to the Carol Cadets and so on and so forth. And one thing that I will definitely want to point out too is that, you know, kind of getting into some of that, if you are someone who is wondering exactly why none of Ms. Marvel's friends and family, with the exception of Bruno, if you're wondering why none of these characters remember that she is Ms. Marvel, despite the fact that it seemed like previously they did know, in the wake of Ms. Marvel's death, Emma Frost went back and mind wiped all of them. So that way, neither her parents nor her friends, none of them know that, for one, that she was Ms. Marvel, and for two, that she had ever died. All that trauma was completely taken away, so that way when she came back, it wouldn't make things weird. Not only that, the only reason why Bruno knows is because in the previous series of Ms. Marvel the New Mutant, Kamala told him. This is why when you see characters like Nikita and Zoe and so on and so forth, well, it seems like on some cases, some of them are down on Ms. Marvel or hating her because she's a mutant, or just seem dismissive towards Ms. Marvel right now. That is why. It's not because they hate Kamala, it's because right now they don't know that Kamala and Ms. Marvel are one and the same. Another interesting thing that happens this issue too is we see the return of Lyla Cheney. Now, this is of note, and I would forgive anyone for being confused as to why this is such a big deal. The reason why is because it was heavily believed during the events of last year's X-Men Hellfire Gala, the belief was that Lyla Cheney was killed off, and we believe this because during the recent Uncanny Spider-Man series, specifically Uncanny Spider-Man #3, Nightcrawler himself says that Lyla Cheney was ripped apart by Sentinels. Yet in this issue, she is the one who teleports Ms. Marvel out of harm's way when she's fighting Horde Culture, and seemingly having teleported her to the Sword Base. No one actually says it's the Sword Base, but if you look at the background when Ms. Marvel gets there, you can see stuff that's very reminiscent of the Peak, specifically Peak 7. For whatever reason, Lyla Cheney is just holding concerts up here, and for reasons that we don't know. And part of me even wondered if some part of this is her daydreaming all of this has happened, because we know Ms. Marvel does have a tendency to daydream a bit. But yeah, for one reason or another, Lyla Cheney has gotten involved. She has brought her to her concert, and I'm gonna go on a limb and say she's probably gonna try and help Ms. Marvel with this in some fashion or another. So for one, Ms. Marvel's gonna get to meet one of her other idols, because, you know, Lyla Cheney's a pretty big deal in the music world of the Marvel Comics universe, so there's that. Also, I'm curious to see how Lyla is gonna help her with whatever it is she's dealing with. And while we know the next issue of Ms. Marvel Mutant Menace #2 seems to tease that Ms. Marvel's going to be going toe-to-toe with Mojo. I think it's not going to go exactly the way that one might believe that it will, but knowing Mojo, this is probably why Lyla Cheney is involved in any of this, because you know how Mojo is. He always wants those ratings. Something tells me that the concert that Lyla Cheney is performing is very likely something that has some measure to do with him, and maybe that is how all this plays out. It's hard to say at this point, and honestly, probably the weirdest and most out there thing that I was not expecting to see in this comic. I was kind of the impression that this was going to wind up being a more grounded Ms. Marvel comic, just, you know, based on everything that's going on with Fall of X, but it is anything but that, and I'm here for it. You guessed it, obligatory channel outro time. If you're not subscribed to the channel, consider doing so. Clicking that subscribe button and tapping that notification bell ensures that you get more videos just like this one, and you don't miss any of my other content that I drop throughout the week, plus my live streams every Thursday and Saturday. And if you enjoyed the video, make sure you click that like button, keep it plus ultra, and sound off in the comments.